Well, you know, I haven't seen I Know Where I'm Going for, I don't know, years and years. And then one afternoon in London, I put the television on, and there it was. I came in the middle of it, and there I was. And it was quite interesting. And I have to say that now that I'm an adult, I realise now what a wonderful film it is.
I think it was about 2 weeks before I started shooting, or maybe in the weekend before I started shooting Raging Bull. And I think one of the few films I hadn't seen was I Know Where I'm Going. I said, should we put it in? I had a tape of it, and we put it in the cassette player. It was tapes that just started being used. And we watched this film, which we fell totally in love with. And it was such an incredible, quote, discovery, unquote. You know, other people knew about it. I didn't. And I remember a few months later seeing Michael again and say, I just saw a new masterpiece.
You'll come with me to the station.
Tonight?
I'm picking up the Scotch Express there.
You're going to Glasgow?
Further, the Western Isles.
Have you got your ticket? There's bound to be a queue.
It's all arranged. Everything's arranged. I'm going to an island called Killoran.
Where is it?
In the Hebridean. It takes a day and a night to get there. It's his island. He's there already. We're going to be married there, away from people.
It sounds silly to say it, but I Know Where I'm Going really did change my life.
I know where I'm going, and I know who's going with me. I know who I love, but the dear knows who I'll marry.
The film is nearly 50 years old. It was a great success in Britain and America at the time, but for many years now it's been largely forgotten.
The idea is very simple. The idea is of a girl who thinks she really knows what she wants, but she doesn't really know what she wants. And she thinks she wants to get to this island. And for 3 or 4 days, she tries to get to this island because her fiancé is on the island. And when she eventually can get to the island, when the storm drops, she doesn't want to go anymore. She realizes that she's in love with another man.
The film was made by Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger, who had a unique partnership and a unique credit on screen. They called themselves the Archers, and they signed all their films together as written, produced and directed by Powell and Pressburger. They had a vision, a very unusual, rather unworldly vision, and they pursued it with great determination.
I liked the idea from the word go. It was a lovely script, a lovely part. No, I was very lucky. I was very lucky because I'd had that unfortunate thing happening of being a success in my 2 first films, which is an very difficult thing to follow up. And I'd been rather choosy after Shaw's plays, rather naturally, I think. I'd been choosy and hadn't wanted to go to Hollywood. And then Michael Powell and Emeric appeared with this script. And I liked it immensely.
I quite enjoyed doing it because it was a different sort of role for me. I was playing a rather aristocratic lady, and usually I've been playing, you know, rather cutesy little, you know, Cockney kids and things like that, you know. So this was a bit different, but it was scary in a way because it was a really serious... I could feel even then that it was a very classy movie.
The film appeared before the public in December 1945, at the end of the year in which the war was won. This was the moment at which everything that is now under question in Britain, the welfare state, and so many parts of it came into being. And so it was a time of tremendous idealism. And it seems to me this is a film which captures that idealism very well. They wanted to show how a bright young thing, a smart young person, who knows exactly what life is all about and what she wants out of it, discovers that in fact life has much more to offer. And so it's a process of her coming to understand more timeless values than the ones that she had learned during her upbringing.
I'm Nancy Franklin, and This is my office at the New Yorker magazine. I'm an editor at the New Yorker, and I've been working here for 15 years. For the first few months, I was so sort of taken with my view in my office that when anybody came into my office, I would close the door, turn out the lights, pull up the blinds, and do this.
What's that noise?
That will be the seals singing, miss.
The seals?
Yes, they like the warm, foggy weather.
I remember very well the first time I saw the movie. I'd been watching a few Powell Pressburger movies on the public television station in New York, and I'd seen a documentary about Michael Powell that was made in England, and I was very enchanted by his movies and what I was learning about them. And then the television station showed I Know Where I'm Going, and I taped it, and I'd cut off the last couple minutes of it. I started watching it anyway, and I realized right away that I wanted to see this movie, just from the opening credits alone.
It is your first visit to the isle.
Yes, it is.
It is a sublime day.
I was going through sort of a rough patch in my life. I had a good life, but nothing in it was particularly satisfying. I'd been working in the same office for 10 years. I'd been living in the same apartment. Everything seemed very static to me. And just like the character in the movie who's swept off her feet by Roger Livesey, I was swept off my feet by this movie.
Thank you.
And I also had the sense after I watched the movie that I would go to this place where it had been made. It's not that I thought, oh, I'd like to go there. I knew that I would go there. I had a strange but utter certainty about it.
I remember standing at a window, looking out over the sea and over the waving grass. Everything moved. The island was never still. Everything that grew moved. And I remember Emeric standing there, looking out and saying, "That's what I want." And he was looking at a meadow. The grass was about 2 foot, 3 foot high, and it was waving like the waves of the sea. The wind was moving it as though it was moving the surface of the sea. And he said, "That's the Hebridean."
So I crossed the ocean on a ship, which is something I'd long wanted to do anyway. There's something very old-fashioned about boarding a ship, and then that whistle blows and you're off. And it takes 5 days to cross the ocean. You see these sort of mysterious, majestic hills, and you don't quite know what you're getting into. And that's one of the things that drew me to Mull, was this sense of mystery about the place, which is very much evident in the movie.
My name is Sue Fink. My husband and I are the owners of the Western Isles Hotel in Tobermory on the Isle of Mull. And the film I Know Where I'm Going was filmed partly in the hotel in 1944. I first heard of I Know Where I'm Going when an American walked through the front door and asked me if I'd seen the film. I had never had seen the film, and she wanted to see one of the rooms, and she told me all about the film, and I had to take her up in the room. We were actually unpacking our cases to move in, and they climbed over all the packing cases to come and see the room. So I was amazed. And then all year I kept being asked about I Know Where I'm Going, and I was getting really cross because I hadn't seen the film. And then the first Christmas we were here, 3 of our separate friends filmed it on a video and gave it to us as Christmas presents, and that was the first time I'd ever seen it.
Go straight in.
Mr. McNeil,
Yes?
I want to ask you something.
Anything.
Do you mind if we sit at separate tables at lunch? You do understand, don't you?
Of course I don't mind. We are strangers, not even properly introduced.
Yes, but you understand why I'm asking you.
I think you're the most proper young lady I've ever met.
I take that as a compliment.
I didn't really want to see the film because I thought it might spoil how I felt about it by what people had told me about it. And I thought it was a lovely film, beautiful. And I can now understand why all these people come here to see where it was filmed.
Very difficult.
Crazy!
It was a compromise. Post office wanted it up the hill, Katrina down below.
But why just here?
It was a dry summer when they put it here. They forgot that when it rained... Hello?
Right then, Nancy, we're coming up to the famous waterfall and, of
Oh,
course,
yes.
the famous telephone kiosk.
Yes. This is where they call the Western Isles Hotel to make a reservation.
That's correct.
Yes,
that's correct.
I once actually called a friend of mine in New York City from that phone box.
Have you?
To see if he could hear the waterfall on the other end, and he could.
All right, good.
It's all right. You have a big room.
What about you?
Well, I have a small one.
Well, Nancy, we're at Carsig now. A lot of the action happened here, and you can remember the storyline.
Good evening.
Bad luck. No crossing today.
But isn't that the boat from Kaloran?
No.
And if she was, it is not today she'd be getting back, my lady.
But I intend to spend the night on Kaloran.
Oh.
Fisker machi, Lauren.
Here come you, Maverick.
Leave back, Lauren.
Is that Gaelic you're talking?
Yes, my lady. What would it be but the garlic?
This is the spot in the movie where things start to not go her way. She's sitting on the pier and looking at her itinerary, and of course it just blows out of her hands into the water. And that's when you first get the sense that lots of other unpredictable things are going to be happening in the movie.
Port Erin, 5:15 p.m. A motorboat from Kaloran will meet Miss Webster.
Jimmy, one of the funny things I've heard about the making of the movie, when I first came to Mull and I asked Islanders about it, they said that at the time that the filmmakers came here, that the weather actually wasn't as bad as they needed it to be to film some of the scenes. So down here at Carsig, I've discovered that they had boats out in the water there with smoke machines going to actually create foggy conditions when she's standing on the pier.
Well, that always appealed to me. The dramatic lighting in photography, to me, is a vital element. On I Know I'm Going Again had a dramatic effect besides being a great love story. You know, that sort of upbringing I had in composition and making use of the light and shade. And I love shooting against the light. For instance, to me, it's much more exciting than shooting with flat light. Well, I was very fortunate. I was introduced to Fritz Lang. The German technique was not flat lighting, it was stronger contrast. And to me, it's amazing how it brings to life the story in a much more exciting manner.
If my boat doesn't come, will you take me?
No, I will not, my lady.
I stayed at Carsig with them, and I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I went as far as Benesson to get a hold of Wendy. She stayed in the hotel there, and I got her and took her back to be on the set. That was what they called it. You see, it wasn't to be in the job, but to be in the set by 8 o'clock in the morning. And I drove in the dark. I'll never forget it, because I hadn't even lights. You see, we weren't allowed lights. I did that every morning for Wendy, and she was so terribly nice.
Mickey Powell in his book says that she stayed every night in the Western Isles Hotel.
No, that is not correct. That I do know, because I took her, unless she came back, and you never know. The usual way, when you don't know them terribly well, they sit in the back.
But Wendy sat beside me all the time and spoke all the time. Oh, she was good. She was lovely.
And there was a time that you were her stand-in because she was sick or something, and you were... Tell me that story about the hat.
We were down, you'll see the place when you go down to Carsick, down at the pier. And we were waiting, of course, as per usual, for rain. No, it was sun we were waiting for, because I was dressing her rig out. And she had this beautiful hat. Now, what was the name of the fur?
Ocelot?
Ocelot, yes, exactly, thank you. Yes, Ocelot. She had this lovely hat. And I had it on, of course, I was as Wendy. Then the rain came on, and I went to shelter, and Mickey Powell said to me, I'm glad to see you're sheltering the hat, the £90 hat. £90, I said. Well, I've never had £90 in my hand, but I can always say I've had it in my head. Oh, it was lovely. I enjoyed it. I really had a nice time.
Like most of their scripts, Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger worked on them together an awful lot. But always Emeric would write the original story himself and do a first draft of the complete screenplay. And the way he would do this would be he would get the idea and he would write it over and over and over again, sort of hypnotically almost. He said he had to build up a rhythm in himself, and he would often write very, very quickly. So he would write the whole story usually in one day. This is his original sort of 4 or 5 page outline of I Know Where I'm Going. No dialogue at all, purely description. And at this stage, he would show it to Michael Powell, and Michael Powell would make his comments. And then Emeric would go away and he would write a complete screenplay to the film, usually with very little dialogue. Then he would give this to Michael Powell. Michael Powell would write his own version with all the dialogue, and then it would go back to Emeric, who would polish it up, change it, do whatever, and then that would be the final screenplay. And that's what happened in the case of I Know Where I'm Going.
I was lying to you. I'd rather swim in the sea than in a swimming pool.
I know.
And I'd rather catch salmon in my own stream if somebody teach me how.
I know.
And I'd rather go exploring in Rory Moss.
We're in Duart Castle, which is the seat of the Clan MacLean. And there's one scene here. Joan Webster comes over for breakfast, and she's greeted by this very grave little girl who walks into the room reading a book. And she sees Joan, and she says to her, "You're Joan Webster, aren't you?" And Joan says, "Yes." And she says, "You were going to marry Sir Robert Bellinger, aren't you?" And Joan says, "Yes. Do you mind?" And then the little girl says,
"He's rich, isn't he?"
That little girl is played by Petula Clark.
"Are you rich?"
No. I remember it was the scene where I'm sitting at the end of this long, long table in the baronial hall with my glasses, and I was wearing jodhpurs, very grand. And because I didn't have a stand-in, I had to be there for a long, long time. And I was too terrified to ask permission to go to the loo. And I wanted to wee like mad, you know, and I just daren't ask. I was so frightened of Michael Powell. So much so that I eventually weed in my jodhpurs. And, of course, I was too scared to move. And I had to wait until the lunch break, and then I sort of sidled off when everybody else had gone and spent the lunch break drying my jodhpurs on the radiator. That's sad.
The scene that was in this room was actually shot in a set in London. So although it looks exactly like this room, in fact, it was not shot here.
I did all my stuff at Denham Studios. In fact, I didn't even realize that it was all taking place in Scotland until it was sort of virtually over for me. I heard some funny accents, but I didn't realize that we were supposed to be in a Scottish grand house castle.
Authenticity was very important to Pressburger and in particular to Powell. He wanted to get the look of it right and the feel of it, and everything about the place was important to him. The sound of people's voices, the singing, everything about every sort of particular thing about the island he wanted to get right. The paradox is that in fact, while they were filming this movie, Roger Livesey as Michael Powell says in his book, never came within 500 miles of the Western Isles. He was working in a play in London at the time and couldn't get away. And on the island, a double was used. He had to be trained to walk like Roger Livesey, especially while he was wearing a kilt.
Well, it did have its difficulties, except there were no close-ups, you see. Everything that was taken with his stand-in was long shot or medium shot, and naturally, he was the right shape. So when we came to the close-ups in the studio, well, that was perfectly all right with Roger. Oh, that was just a technical thing that one accepts in films.
Back projection was the only media we had then. Well, it wasn't really reliable because it was old equipment which needed replacing. And during that time, during the war period, we couldn't replace anything. So I used deep focus photography on that to bring together the background and the foreground. The larger use of light meters. There weren't any light meters available at that time. So it was all done by eye and, you know, just a human touch, put it this way.
Powell himself said that years later, when he watched the movie, he couldn't always tell which scenes had the double of Roger Livesey and which scenes had Roger Livesey himself. And he said that it was probably the cleverest thing he ever did in movies, and I think it probably was.
Everybody who worked on this film is foreign to Scotland. And of course, even Michael Powell. Michael Powell is not really a standard Englishman. He was educated for a large part of his filmmaking career in the south of France. But there's Alan Gray, the composer, who's German, Polish-German. There's Alfred Junge, who's German, who's the designer of the film. And there's Erwin Hillier, who's the cameraman, who, though he had been in England for 10 years, was actually brought up in Germany. And the first film that he worked on was Fritz Lang's M. And so continentals, as they were called at the time.
In the case of Emeric's contribution, I think Emeric had a very subtle understanding of national difference. And perhaps because he came from outside of Scotland and indeed outside of Britain, he saw this in a way which allowed him to be a little clearer about how to identify those qualities that made for a sense of place, a sense of culture. Michael also, of course, was steeped in a romantic view of national identity. And I think the key to understanding Michael's approach, perhaps, was to remember his great interest in Kipling. Kipling really believed that the past was always present, in the present, and it would show through if you just allowed yourself to be open to it.
I think another thing which is very very typical of their work is the element of mysticism in it. Now, a lot of people have said that in this film there's this mysticism, and it's very sort of Celtic, and it's very of the Western Isles. It's of the sort of the rural traditions, the folklore. But I think, yes, there's an element of that. But actually, if you look at it, it's Jewish in a way. It's Emeric Pressburger, the Hungarian Jew in Britain, and all these little phrases that people come up with. You know, the famous line about people around here are very poor. No, they just don't have very much money. That's the same thing, isn't it? No, that sort of line. It's kind of almost like Isaac Bashevis' Singer. It's a rabbinical kind of Jewish wisdom. And there it is in the Highlands.
Hollywood is talking of remaking this film. Scott Rudin has optioned it. Do you think that a film like this can be remade? And if I could ask you, how would you remake it?
I would never remake it, but, you know, I mean, there are a lot of films that could, I mean, you could take the idea, a person wants to get to an island, never does, winds up on another island with another man, marries the other one, you know. Certainly you can make it for today's generation, although this particular film is something that you can't recapture the beauty of the first impressions.
I want you to kiss me.
It has an emotional impact that that is overwhelming each time. It's very interesting. I don't know if you can get that today. I mean, who knows, but...
Kilan!
Corrie Vrechen.
You're looking at the island of Scarborough with a cloud on the top of it.
Right.
To the left of that is the island of Jura. And in between Scarborough and Jura lies the whirlpool.
Well, the whirlpool itself was not only dangerous, at times nearly impossible. And because you don't realize the power of the whirlpool itself.
And how old were you when you worked on the movie?
That's giving my age away. I would say about 20 years.
Okay.
It was supposed to start at 3 o'clock, but we went out at 2:45.
And where was the director of the movie when all this was
They were
taking place?
sitting at the top of the island of Scarborough, right at the very top,
Yes.
filming right down.
I see.
Unfortunately, the spring tide was very strong, and I looked to the shore and I said to my father, this boat's going backwards. So he said, right, just cut the rope and let's get into Scarborough. So we managed to get into Scarborough with a bit of difficulty, I would say.
When I came back in the evening when we finished shooting, I mentioned to Michael Powell we had to go through it again because I felt it was not exciting enough. So he said, what went wrong? I said, we used the wrong lenses.
And I must admit, that's the first time I ever put a drop of whiskey to my mouth. And then when I went home to Eastland, my mother wasn't too happy because I was well under the weather, really.
The difference was fantastic on the second journey. So instead of using the normal lenses, I used telephoto lenses. And it's brought the whole thing to life.
When I saw the film, when I saw the boat going through the whirlpool, I closed my eyes for a minute because it takes back memories, really.
Dear lovely woman, your letter and your photographs of Moy Castle brought tears to my eyes. Your photographs are really supreme, and it almost made me sorry that I didn't make the film in color. Anyway, it was a great joy and compliment to receive your letter and realize that I am in touch with so many delightful people through my films, and particularly through that one film, Many Thanks, Michael Powell. And then there's a P.S. from Thelma, Michael Powell's wife, Thelma Schoonmaker Powell. She says, my director, Martin Scorsese, is also an enormous fan of Ickwig and was bowled over by your photographs. Do you think it might be possible to make some copies for him? He would love to have them. Of course, it was possible to make copies for him, and I did do that. Well, I dropped them off one day at Thelma's office. I got home a few hours later, and my phone was ringing. I picked up the phone. It was Thelma Powell. And she said, here, let me put Michael on the phone. And then he asked me pointedly, why I had gone to Mull. And I said, well, it actually was because of your movie. And he said, yes, I know, but most people don't take a hint so broadly. And he said to me, we must meet you. But 3 months later, he died, and I never did get to see him again.
I think it is the kind of film that can change your life because it's a film with a message, but the message works very much on a gut level.
Sitting in the dark watching a film really is the nearest thing to having a dream while you're awake. But I think it touches very deep, unconscious fears and desires.
I know who I love, but the dear knows who I'll marry. I have stockings of silk and shoes of fine green leather, combs to buckle my hair, and a ring for every finger. Some say he's black, but I say he's bonny, the fairest of them all, my handsome, winsome Johnny.